Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Geelong Chamber of Commerce 4th webinar, Creating Positive Mindsets in the Workplace. And I'm really fortunate today to be joined by a great panel, starting with Ray McLean from Leading Teams. How are you, Ray?
I'm well, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And Dane Barclay from Bellarine Psychology. How are you, Dane?
For the invitation. Yeah, pretty good at the moment.
Libby Brooks from WorkSafe. Welcome, Libby.
Hi. Thank you.
And Catherine Bell from Bell Training Group. How are you, Catherine?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, good. Thanks, Ben.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our corporate partners at the Chamber of Commerce, especially SC Technology, our platinum partner, for allowing us to do these kind of cool things. We've got 150 people supporting us or participating today, so thank you to everyone for your support. I'd like to take this time also to thank all of the Chamber team, including our board, for all of the hard work we're putting in at the moment. We're certainly in your corner during these difficult times and having a real go at supporting you to get through this, not only to get through it, but also to come out the other end thriving. And I think that's a little bit about what today's all about. We're going to be going for 30 minutes, and I really encourage participants to use the Q&A function down the bottom, and let me know of any questions that you have for the panelists, and I'll call them out as best I can. You can also engage in the chat function and talk to some of the other participants and elaborate or build on some of the ideas discussed by the panelists today as well. So getting into it, Catherine, I might start with you. Very nice background there in bow and heads. How are you going, and how has your business been affected at the moment?
Yeah, thank you. My husband and I run our consulting firm from home, but he's on a big contract with a national broadband provider at the moment, which are actually doing an amazing job. So he's been able to retain that contract and just work from home. For me, everything changed within about 24 hours. So I lost every single forward booking I had for about 6 months within about a 24-hour period. So that was pretty shocking. But actually in the past couple of weeks, it's all started to come back as people have realised that they still need support for their teams. So I'm just doing that work remotely now, coaching and facilitating online courses.
Yeah. And Libby at WorkSafe, I know you're all working from home at the moment. How are you finding time, or how are you contacting your clients and continuing the great WorkSafe message?
Yep. Well, some of our speakers are still going out to business and to workers, obviously risk assessing before they go. And where possible, we are doing Skype meetings. From my perspective, I'm in the specialist area. So my contact is mostly Skype. Yep. But we are going into workplaces still as an essential service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Dane, your psychology practice down in Ocean Grove, how have you found people have responded to the distancing rules, and how has that affected your business?
Yeah, look, essentially, all of my colleagues are working from home. So I guess the work that we do, we lose a bit over telehealth. And unfortunately, though, the government over the last sort of 10 days or so has mandated, in essence, that we do telehealth, and there are vulnerable parts of the community, which, you know, it opens up more scope for people to access the services. It's just done in a different way. So we just need to be a bit more adaptive, and, you know, I think if we're 18 years of age, we'll be cool with technology, but we're just adjusting to it.
And Ray, you were telling me you're doing a bit of work with the Sydney Swans at the moment. How are you managing that from a distance perspective?
I had to learn the technology around Zoom very quickly. And I think for our business, it was a really varied, response. We've got some clients who are businesses as usual, and so they've adapted really quickly to this. It hasn't really changed other than we're doing it remotely. But I guess the Swans for me was one where the whole, football side of things shut down. Obviously my contract, and, a lot of the staff were all stood down, but I suppose I was in a position where I'd offered to the Swans that I would continue to do the work with the emerging leaders, coaches, that sort of thing. So, that's just something I've done because of the strength of the relationship there. But pretty varied, and having to come to grips with the new ways.
Yeah. Very good. Dane, I might start with you as a practicing psychologist, and I know, Libby, you're a psychologist as well. But Dane, do you mind just sort of going through some of the, some of the more professional terms around what people are feeling as a result of this virus and how it's affecting everyday people?
Yeah, so I guess essentially there's a whole heap of uncertainty, and we know that the brain dislikes uncertainty, and be that uncertainty for ourselves or like almost a collective sense of that. So consequently there's anxiety, and then we can go through more of the economic issues around loss of employment or at least reduced hours. Even people adjusting to, again, with kids, what do we do with managing our kids and going forward and the impact on us? So, yeah, certainly terms around anxiety and symptoms of depression as well. Yeah.
And do you think will that have an effect on personal relationships and also the way people behave, such as substance abuse and social issues?
I would imagine so. The brain's all about problem solving, and it wants to either move you towards something that feels really comfortable or move you away from something that feels uncomfortable. And we've all got a range of ways of doing that, be it adaptively or maladaptively. So from a substance perspective, or even relationships, we're spending a lot more time with our partners and people that matter to us, which is fantastic, and it's relentless as well. So no doubt these things are gonna show up a lot more frequently. It's like, where do we get that downtime and how do we get heard, particularly when we're trying to navigate all that uncertainty and help everyone else feel uncomfortable as well.
Yep. Now, Libby, a lot of these, as managers in the workplace, we need to be aware that people are having these challenges at home.
Yep.
And what recommendations can you give to managers on how to manage the workplace better, knowing this and working remotely?
Yeah, it's a challenging one. It's one of those key elements of work well-being is supervisor support, and it's more important now than ever, I think, to feel connected and to actually have that open and honest communication, and have real clarity around what the expectations are as well, and an understanding of the fact that your kids could walk in at any time when you're on a Skype meeting or a Zoom meeting, and it's more around having a little bit of trust as well with regards to goal setting and actually understanding that that the day is not necessarily a 9 till 5, could be flexible, and it could be just focused on outcomes and output that they actually provide from that perspective.
Yeah.
Also, for those potentially, if I can, just also, so for those people who are working from home, that's probably most relevant, but we've got a lot of a workforce who their demands have suddenly increased, and it's also an understanding around an appreciation for the feeling of risk and uncertainty and anxiety there.
Now, Catherine, I know you've been doing some work still with teams in terms of understanding people's strengths, and working to build resilience. Are they still activities that you think are relevant in the current environment?
Yeah, I think they're actually more relevant than ever, Ben, but just in a really different way. So if I can speak about strengths for a second, strengths, we tend to think at work about task-based strengths, but a lot of people's tasks might have changed. They're doing those tasks from home, and maybe they're feeling a bit unsure about it and experiencing some of those, stress and anxiety things. But we've got a deeper strength in us, and that is our character strengths, the approaches, the mindsets that work for us. So if we can start to sort of understand what are the deeper approaches and mindsets that work for us, then we can approach new or change tasks with those strengths and still get a great result. So actually, there's something I'd love to be able to share with everyone. I'll pop it into the chat box later on, but there's a couple of really big strengths profiling providers who are actually offering their profiles for free at the moment to try and help people cope with this time. And the evidence is if we use our strengths, we actually get better results, we're more efficient, we're happier. And so it's worth starting to understand your character strengths, and I'll pop the links in for you just so anyone can jump on and get their strengths profile.
Very good. Very good. And Ray, I know you do a lot of work with teams like Catherine as well. How important is culture and values during times of crisis?
Well, pivotal because that gives us that sense of connection. One of the things that we've noticed is that the teams and the organisations that we've worked with that invested heavily in building really strong relationships within their teams are the ones who are actually coping okay at the moment, because they're in a position where, say, for example, yesterday running a session with a team, you can do a proper check-in and find out how people are really going. But if they haven't built those, and you just sort of pop up on the screen and say, okay, how are you feeling? Then there's a fair chance they won't actually be as open. And so I think there's some who have, without knowing it, built resilience before this happened. And I think the ones who are experiencing the shortfall now would probably see that as being a priority when they get back, that perhaps, you can still build those bridges, but we're finding that quite powerful at the moment. Just the check-in, the looking after one another, as opposed to someone feeling really alone and not knowing and feeling that disconnection. So, for us, it's sort of reinforced the model really strongly about relationships, the behaviours that are accepted and expected on the team, and what you're doing about it now. It sort of, I guess, has meant the model holds true.
Yep. Libby, with WorkSafe, are employers still under the same obligations as in any sort of bricks and mortar workplace?
Yeah, they are. But of course, what's reasonably practicable is it's one of those things that's important to remember. So I think the focus, from my perspective at least, is around trying to build capacity in this wellbeing space and trying to reduce the risk of psychological injury, because I think that's going to be one of the risks. It's one of the risks that I see, because that's what I deal with. But I see that is something that is probably going to come to the forefront more than ever before. Yep.
And will we need to have policies and stronger mechanisms in place as managers to, I suppose, show a whole new level of understanding to some of those symptoms or some of those situations?
It's around the system of support, and it's around having a system to recognise, or even compassion from a supervisor or from a leader, and understanding, so they don't necessarily have to go out and quickly write a whole lot of policies. It's around actually providing that support and actually showing that you are aware that their demands have increased or not. Because of course, if you're sitting at home with not so many demands, there is a feeling of uncertainty, and it's just as risky for an individual than if they have really high pressure demands and having to learn new systems and learn new skills or adapt to a different type of way of working. So it's around having as much support systems as you possibly can in place and recognition that is going to be a difficult transition time for them.
Yeah. Now, Dane, you're similar to me, a couple of young kids at home and trying to balance everything at the moment. Is it really important, more so than ever, to take ourselves offline and have some downtime?
100%. And I guess I use the language of being deliberate about it. There's often guilt that shows up for us because we're all pretty caring people, typically speaking. We care about our partners, we care about our kids. And it's bloody hard to find time at the moment. It's either work or with family, right? So having some really clear conversations about that with whoever your boss is at home, and be that going for a run or whatever your version of exercise that works for you that you're going to commit to. Because it helps you bring it back into your other relationships. It is about being quite deliberate about it, and it might mean that you're feeling anxious, but if it's in service of what matters, which is your own well-being, then that's a really good reason to choose to go and do something that initially feels uncomfortable, but it's for the greater good.
And what about the concept of self-improvement? I think we all came into this self-isolation thinking that we were going to be, I've even said it to my staff, I'm going to be watching a TED talk every day. I'm going to be doing all sorts of learning. And to be honest, I've found it really hard to find the time to do any of that. Do we need to be, and this goes to everyone, do we need to be more understanding of what we're capable of and and how much we can commit to throughout this period?
Yeah, can I, I think there's a little bit of an illusion out there, and I don't know what's coming through people's social media channels, but there's this need to be productive, be productive in whatever version that looks like. And maybe it's actually about, taking time and taking stock of what matters. And I think people will get a clearer focus on that, and rather than pursuing, there seems to be a lot of pursuing leisure activities or skilling things around, or upskilling about creativity as well. But in essence, that feels as though it's driving along the lines of, that need to be more productive, and at what cost, and kind of just reflecting on that as we're tracking on, I think would be useful.
Yeah.
And I think that might come in time where we start to feel like, okay, now I'm learning something from this. Now I'm realizing some things about my life, but you've got to let yourself process the emotions as well. When I lost all my forward bookings, I didn't want to get out of bed for a week. I did, but, kind of barely. I just needed some time to cope with it and figure out what this meant for me. So be compassionate with yourself. And I think if you let yourself go through that learning, then the improvement comes as we keep going.
I think with our group, we've got 20 scattered around Australia. And the first thing we did was to say to everyone, just go back and take stock of your life. What will you have to do? Look after your family and look after you first. And then somewhere over a little bit of time, you'll start to think about, well, perhaps there's an opportunity to improve my skills. So we're doing, some really strong work internally with one another around that improvement. But it's, as you said, Dane, that would make no sense to have people driven to that prior to them having, getting their head around the old Maslow's theory, I guess, making sure that I've got my shelter and food and family and those sorts of things sorted. And I think that was, it turned out to be a really good decision to just let people take the time to sort themselves, to, if they needed to go to the banks, they needed to see their accountants, they needed to tend to all of those things. And then we're in a better position to start to organise. But if you put them under too much pressure early, I just think it would have been unproductive.
Yeah, and can I just sort of add in, I think there seems to be a bit of a collective theme amongst all of us about the notion of compassion to the self and compassion to whoever we work with and whoever our colleagues are, about allowing ourselves to essentially, whatever language you want, grieve for our loss of freedom, grieve for whatever it may be, the uncertainty and the change, and having time, as Ray just said, just to sit with it, let stuff emerge as it does, because it's not often we're forced to get off, the treadmill, so to speak.
I think we had a really good example of where the relationship piece and some compassion can come through. One of the people who work on our team live in Northcote with their family, and they've got ageing parents in Mordialloc. And as it turns out, one of our other staff members lives about 3 streets away, and they've been doing the shopping for them. And it's, it was a great thing to do. And it's funny, the guy who's doing the shopping says he feels most pressured just making sure he gets the shopping list right. But it's something that we can sit down and talk about. And it's just one of those things that you reach out to people, and that's where the relationship part, and combined, as you said, Dane, with some compassion, is we'll see some good stories out of this, as well as some, obviously some of the other bits that we've seen.
So no doubt, because the next sort of idea I want to talk a little bit about is high-performing teams, and we've touched on it already, but having compassion and understanding and trust is probably the basis for then the next step in terms of engaging with your staff and continuing to build those teams. Would that be a fair assessment, Ray?
Well, yeah, I think so. For me, there's I guess a pretty simple definition I've tried to use over the journey, that in terms of high performance, I always like to think of it as the wider the gap between what you say you stand for and high performing. To me, the high performing teams are the ones where there's congruency, where like Elizabeth said, leaders who are leading not through policy, they're actually doing it because it's the right thing to do. And I think that people in teams now are looking for that more than ever, is what is what you say, what you're doing. And, I think there's great opportunities for leaders to narrow that focus down and make sure that in some way, shape or form, the values that you espouse are the ones that you're going to live and deliver.
And adding on to what Ray was saying, and I sort of come from a high performance background, but I work with kids these days locally, which is great. It's a bit of we say with kids, if you want them to change their behaviour, you need to understand it. And it's a truism for all adults. And really, it's about understanding it emotionally. So be it people are bored, people can't be bothered, people are angry, people are frustrated, people are anxious, be it cleaning your teeth, or be it pursuing tasks in a workspace. But if you as a leader haven't been able to engender what we call psychological safety, where someone can share what's going on without fear of being judged, even though you think you might do that may not be the other person's felt experience. That's where you start to get really big shifts and change from a performance perspective, in the sense of consistency under sort of stress and pressure.
Yeah. And is this an opportunity for managers, if they take the right approaches to actually really, continue to build that team and foster trust, then come out of it much more strongly? Catherine?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I actually think it's an opportunity for us to all the structures and all the stuff that we used to cosset ourselves with at work have been stripped away, and we've got this interaction. So make it count and understand that your ability to enhance your emotional intelligence is going to be the single biggest thing that you can do that's going to help your team be more effective. So invest time in the small things, like asking someone how they are and really listening. And that whole, like Ray and I think Elizabeth's been saying as well, just leading by example. You've got to be able to show people that you're being authentic. This is not the time to close off. This is the time to be more deeply human than ever before. And I think that's what gets us through.
And I would like to add, I think it's rather than social distancing, I think it's physical distancing, but social connection. I think that's the key underlying it all.
I think that was a poor use of language early, wasn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
Libby, I've got a question from someone in the audience,
Sure.
and I hope I'm phrasing it correctly, but what's WorkSafe's position on people working from home? Are they going to need to do audits of their physical workspaces, or is that something that's applicable now or down the track? Or
I actually don't have an official response on that one. I'm sorry. Anywhere that is a WorkSafe, a workplace, comes under the Act, and it is something that needs to be considered. What's reasonably practicable is the key, and it is different. And at the moment, if anyone has any concerns, that's something that you still ring through to advisory as you would normally, and you have that conversation there, and that would be the most appropriate way to deal with it.
Yep. And it's a nice segue into the next area that I'd like to sort of focus on, and that is, this has been a huge change, no doubt about it. And is it a fundamental shift, and will the future of work look a fair bit different moving forward? Will there be more working from home, more online platforms, more virtual events? Could be so much. Catherine?
Yeah, look, it's funny. Humans, we like to go in pendulums, right? So, like, we're all working from home right now. We're going to be craving connection. So I reckon we're going to sort of go back to wanting, I think, a little bit more stability, a little bit more safety, predictability in our workplaces. But also, we've learned these great skills about how to connect with each other on a deeper level. So I think it's going to fundamentally change how humans interact and what we need when we go back to work. But also, it's forced us to accelerate our uptake of the effective pieces of technology available. So I actually think that's a positive thing in the end, as long as we're using them well.
And Ray, I suppose how can this sort of crisis affect some of your clients in terms of the Sydney Swans? Are they going to be changing the way they approach their workplaces?
Well, they have to. The comment that I made to the young players that I was working with yesterday was that the workplace that they walk back into could look like what a football club looked like 25 years ago when I started. There's going to be so few staff around. In a sense, the thing we're coming to grips with, as we chatted about before, is that these players have got to the point where they've been mollycoddled, I guess. There was so many staff around supporting them that we're going to find out how many of them have those self-management skills and how many of them are going to need help to develop them, because they'll have to make more choices themselves about what they're doing to pursue their careers. And that's not just unique to football, that's for everyone. But I think I tend to agree with Catherine. There'll be somewhere people will want to see one another again and interact with one another again. But at the same time, we've developed we've recognised these tools that are really effective, because someone who's been largely a face-to-face facilitator for 25, 30 years, I must admit I was somewhat dubious about how this might all work, but I can see now, even as an older person, some new ways that are going to be help me to be more effective, but still that we'll be people who want to congregate when we can and support one another and build those relationships.
Dane, it must be very difficult working with kids to do things online. Are we ever going to be able to replace that face-to-face in your area?
Well, briefly, not from their perspective. They're loving the use of the iPad. Yeah, look, I mean, in essence, our job as psychs is all about genuine human connection, and it's certainly difficult over the phone. So on telehealth, you can give instruction, you can lecture, you can pass on information, but there's so much happening within a room that you miss out on. So I would imagine inevitably people will come back into the office space, because as Catherine was saying, we're all on a pendulum. We crave that interaction. For some, I would imagine they'll still continue to use the Zooms and other telehealth systems, particularly because I think generationally they're far more exposed to it.
I might just go around the room and give everyone the last opportunity. Just what do you think are your top couple of tips for managers these days in terms of building a thriving team to come out of this a lot stronger and to make sure that you really embrace the opportunity at some stage?
I think from my perspective, lots of clear communication, discussion, and really compassion and understanding where they're at, where everyone's at, and clarity as well, and maybe setting short, small, achievable goals and keeping things manageable and helping to motivate people to actually do things that are achievable.
I mean, I'd add to that, and from manager's perspective, under stress and pressure, know your stories and how you move away from being that compassionate person.
Yep.
And make yourself accountable to what that looks like, even though you're experiencing your stuff at the same time.
Mine would be, around for leaders not to make an assumption that people will come if they've been isolated or away, not to assume they'll come back and they'll be just in the same state. That time spent with them, talking about that experience, understanding them, and then, doing what you need to do won't be time wasted. People think that it's going to be unproductive if you don't get people back quickly and get them to work. I think, you will have had it sort of what I would have called us about there. You're going to have to reconnect people, give them a chance to talk to one another, and know that they will have all been on their own journey and collect together again. I just couldn't recommend that more highly. But even yesterday, when I had the kids together from the Swans, just an exercise at the start where I asked them to share with one another what they've found difficult, disappointing and delightful in this period. And it just gave us a chance to, find out how we were all feeling. And then you could get to work in the session. But it was, it would have been silly for me to sit here on a screen as they've never seen me before and just assume that it was work as normal. So I think that's the big one for me.
Difficult, disappointing and delightful, Ray. I might use that if you don't mind.
You can fill your boots.
As well as maybe thinking about a few things that went well at the end of every day and being grateful for what we have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the other panellists and their comments. And the only other thing I'd add is what I'm noticing with some of my clients, we sort of did the initial emergency, wow, we've really got to deal with this. And on the situational leadership scale, you've got to really move into a bit of command and control in that initial phase. But now that things are starting to settle into what some semblance of a new normal, don't forget to open back up and start collaborating with your people again. And don't forget to shift that leadership style away from emergency back into a more collaborative style, because creativity comes from solving problems like this. We have untold resources available now floating around. Let's make use of them and invite your teams to tell you how they think things could be better too, because I bet they've got lots of ideas.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. As with all of our webinars, I wish we could have so much more time. Thank you to all of our participants for asking some questions, some of which I've been able to get across, which is great. Catherine Bell from Bell Training, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Libby Brooks from WorkSafe, thank you, Libby.
Thank you.
Dane Barclay from Bellarine Psychology, thank you, Dane.
Pleasure, thank you.
And Ray McLean from Leading Teams, thank you very much, Ray.
Pleasure.
And I hope you all join us for our next webinar next Thursday at 2 p.m. You should be able to follow our socials and our newsletters to find out more about that. Thank you, everyone, and have a great Easter.